What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamoda and Danny Abdel-Jabbar. How's it going, Danny? How are you?
Chilling as per usual. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well. As I was saying before we just started recording this, I wanted to ask you, do you still get a little butterflies before we start recording this? I don't know. Do you?
Yeah, a little bit, especially if I'm like really passionate about the subject and I don't want to fuck it up.
Do you ever start one of these episodes like just completely carefree and cool and collective and like, oh, don't have any concerns about saying something stupid?
No. No, not yet at least.
I always assume that I'm going to say something stupid or feel like I don't know something key or I always doubt myself.
Yeah.
100% of the time. I'm always self-doubting myself.
120 episodes later and we're still doing it.
120 episodes later and we're still doing it. Oh, this is 120, by the way.
Yep.
I just realized that. What's up, guys? I hope everyone's having a good, I guess we're in the middle of November at this point. And I guess this is one of those episodes where I guess we finally have our conclusion of the most important revelation of Impeachgate. Or Ukraine-gate or Russia-gate. You know, first there was Russia-gate. Now first there was Russia-gate. Then there was Ukraine-gate. Now we have Fartgate.
That's right. Fartgate.
Fartgate. If you guys haven't heard this yet, and I'm sure probably 90% of you have, so Eric Swalwell, a guy who was running for president, he was the guy who talked about confiscating people's guns.
Also, he was the guy that kept like age shaming Biden and telling him like, pass the torch, bro, pass the torch.
You're such a liberal, Danny, age shaming. Come on, old man, get off the stage. He was delivering an interview. I don't know, was it CNN or MSNBC, one of the networks. And on that interview, while talking about Ukraine-gate, he farted.
Fatted.
He farted. And you can see a little squeeze in his cheeks, like he just let one off, like, ooh. He farted.
And it was audible.
I don't understand how the microphone caught that.
Dude, microphones are good. I mean, catches all the fucking sirens and every little thing in New York City that we record, so why wouldn't it catch a fart?
That's a fair point, but isn't there the mic when you're mic'd up for a show like that? The mic is on your jacket. You know
what
I mean?
Sometimes they use booms. You know, sometimes they use those boom mics.
Yeah, so. I guess that's a good point, but I'm surprised. I mean, it's a good microphone to pick up that fart, and
we got to get one of those.
I'm pretty sure it's confirmed that it was a fart. I don't know if he's denying it or not. I actually have not heard his testimony. His testimony on the fart. If it was a fart or not, we don't know if it was wet or not.
Right.
That's always
we have to always leave
that up.
That's the real question.
Did he shart? Was it just a fart? Was it a dry fart? We will never know. But we need to get his underwear samples to make sure that he's clear. But it kind of reminds me. Do you watch South Park? Are you a South Park fan?
Of course, yeah.
So in the early episodes, there was it was like a 2-part series when you were going to find out who Cartman's father was. And instead of it being the next episode, they had an episode of Terrence and Phillip who just fart. We bring you an episode from Canada. And all they do is fart. Terrence, you farted, Terrence. Phillip, you fucked your uncle. But yeah, that was there, which was always interesting. And then, of course, that's the biggest news of the day, so we needed to address that.
Yeah, we got to get that out of the way.
We have to get that. We have to just address that and get that out of the way.
We're planning on doing a 2-episode special on it, so
we were planning on doing a 2-episode debate on Fartgate, but, other things came up, and we just don't have time to call the experts in and do the research. It's going to take hundreds of hours of research to do an episode like that. Real. So we need to back off and take on easier subjects like the ones that we're going to take on today.
Yeah.
But of course, I guess the elephant in the room, the big thing that has happened over the past couple of days was that the Trump administration has they have recognized the settlements in Israel. So the settlements, well, not in Israel, the settlements within the West Bank as legal.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. They're softening their position, which de facto probably means they're recognizing it, but they didn't go so far as to say like, "Yep, those are that's Israeli land." But yeah, we'll get into that though.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But what I was planning on before that actually happened, this episode, I was planning on doing it on Saudi Aramco because Saudi Aramco just released their value.
Their valuation. Their
valuation was just released for their public offering. And,
it's not very public either.
Well, so what they wanted to get was $2 trillion, which is a lot of fucking money. But Saudi Aramco
that's
is
like 2 Amazons.
That's 2 Amazons. And they wanted the value at $2 trillion, but the valuation was at $1.7 trillion. So,
right.
I mean, it sounds like only $1.7 trillion, but that's $300 billion.
Right.
That's a lot. That's a humongous difference within the valuation.
Yeah, and you know what they always say? It's like, what the difference between $1 billion and $1 trillion is? It's about $1 trillion.
It's about $1 trillion. It's about $1 trillion. Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah,
and it's kind of funny because there's different takes on this, on why the valuation was lower, why it came out as 1.7 and not 2 trillion. I mean, first of all, of course, they're going to overvalue their own national oil company. So, I mean, you could expect them to inflate the actual valuation of it. Like, you ever watch Shark Tank when somebody who like invented a new? Obviously, this is way different than Shark Tank, but just if you watch an episode,
for a really great like commercial. It's just like Mohammed bin Salman goes on Shark Tank to like get an IPO for Aramco. We should make that.
I know that would be funny, but it's funny because so there's different takes on why the valuation came out lower, and one of the main takes I've seen on like the Huffington Post was because of global warming. Global warming was one of the takes. The real reason I don't really believe that the valuation was lower because countries are less hungry for oil, because just as many countries are hungry as oil as ever before. If you look at the Eastern markets, and that's who they primarily export their oil to. Right. So it's not like markets, not because of like solar power or energy or alternative energy methods. No. The Asian markets are their primary trading partners. The U.S. gets most of its oil from Canada as well as itself and Mexico. But the reason why their valuation came lower, and this is something that we've been talking about, and we've had experts on the show talking about the same thing, is because no one wants to invest foreign capital within Saudi Arabia.
Right. Because that's the real reason.
There's multiple reasons why you wouldn't want to invest foreign capital in Saudi Arabia. I mean, number one, the clear things that have been going on in the news is that it's clearly that the oil processing facilities are in a striking range from either Iran or the Houthis or both.
Right, and for those that didn't listen to our previous episode on the Houthi strike, Aramco is the company that was struck in those drone strikes in Saudi Arabia. What was it, like 2 months ago or something like that? A month and a half?
Either one, Iran or Houthis, is still unclear exactly who did it or how exactly it happened. But regardless, it's people are concerned that these oil processing facilities and oil fields can be lit up at any time. Right. And it's a legitimate concern.
Right. And it's bigger concern because they're in an active war with Yemen right now.
They're also in an active war with Yemen. And also the other big thing is that nobody wants to invest foreign capital in a country where you have a crown prince who has really consolidated power to himself and is completely unpredictable. Just like how the stock prices of Tesla went down after He was on Joe
Elon
Rogan
Musk
smoking
smoked some
weed.
That was bullshit, man.
I know it's stupid when you think about it, but like still things like that affect, like when the CEO of a company does something stupid, the stock prices fall.
Right.
Now he is the crown prince of the country that has a national oil company, a nationalized oil company or state-run oil company,
right? Mm-hmm.
And it's the largest oil company in the world. So he's the de facto,
he's the CEO.
head of state and CEO there. But he throws people, you have the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which is almost minor compared to other things that he's done that are pretty unpredictable. The shakedown,
minor, but not unforgivable.
The shakedown. I think more so it's the shakedown of the Saudi princes throughout his tenure as crown prince, when he started throwing him in jail for basically not going along with his
technically.
The Ritz, all right, throwing him in jail, throwing him in the Ritz-Carlton, which is Saudi jail, which is jail for a Saudi prince. And apparently he was forcing them to purchase stock or purchase shares of Aramco. Apparently he was doing it was a shakedown because he wanted them to go along with his economic reforms, like the Saudi Vision 2030 whole thing. And people don't want to invest in a country where the head of state who controls the national oil company is completely unpredictable. So of course the valuation is going to go down. Like it was totally foreseeable that they were not going to get the $2 trillion. But I wanted to talk about that because if we didn't talk about that in the beginning of this episode, we're totally going to forget about it because we're going to talk about a way more not complex, but way more.
It's plenty complex, but.
It's not really that complex when you actually think about it, but it's people like to say it's complex. But before we get started, let me tell you about the most useful app on my phone. It's hard to find time to sit down and read. When you don't have free time, you can't read or work on personal development. And it sucks when you're really busy. There's this incredible app that solves this problem, and I highly recommend it. It's called Blinkist. Blinkist really it's really unique. It works on your phone and your tablet and on your web browser. And what it does, Blinkist takes the best key takeaways, the need-to-know information from thousands of nonfiction books, and then it condenses them down into just 15 minutes that you can just read or listen to it. Successful people like business leaders are well known for reading a lot of books. Anyone who's super smart is reading all the time, and they spend a large part of their day reading all the time. But it's hard to retain all that information. So Blinkist solves that problem because they condense everything, and you get the key facts and you get the key takeaways from that book. And it's even really great after you read a book, because you can still get those takeaways and those notes to kind of just reinforce the messaging of that book. 8 million people are using Blinkist right now, and it has a massive growing library from self-help business, health to history books. History books, just like this podcast. Blinkist has the latest titles from the bestsellers list, as well as the classic nonfiction titles you always meant to read, but never really had time to. And I'm sure there's plenty of them. Again, I use Blinkist on my morning commute every single day, and the morning it's just an awesome. It's the most productive way to go travel for me. And I can listen to multiple books or even the same Blinkist at the same time. The ones I really recommend for people are How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie is on Blinkist, and that was something that really, really helped me when I first graduated from college to get it to develop in the professional world. I really, really highly recommend it, and Blinkist does a great job converting it. So How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And then Danny, Danny, you had some nice Blinkist experiences, right?
Yep. I got through Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari, which is like a look into the future of humanity, and it was super fascinating, and I really enjoyed how quickly I was able to get through it, and I think I'm actually going to pick up the book itself because it really got me hooked.
So with Blinkist, you get unlimited access to read or listen to a massive library of condensed nonfiction books. All the books you want and all for one low price. Right now, for a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/bro to try it free for 7 days and save 25% off your new subscription. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist, Blinkist.com/bro to start your free 7-day trial, and you'll also save 25% off, but only when you sign up at Blinkist.com/bro. Thank you, Blinkist.
Thanks, Blinkist.
All right, so back to Fartgate. No, back to the Swolwell report. Before we start talking about the settlements and all that, a funny idea I had when I wanted to condense a YouTube video of Jordan Peterson. Mm-hmm. You know Jordan Peterson, yeah. Right? So Jordan Peterson has all these lectures, and I really actually liked his lectures. I had this silly idea of super audio imposing farts in the background every single time he made a weird facial expression, just like the farting preacher. You ever see those videos?
Yeah.
Type in, if you've never seen a farting preacher, type in farting preacher. They are very funny. I won't spoil it for you, but you'll have a good laugh. But yeah, so these settlements, I don't know, where do we start when explaining this? Because I guess there's a lot of, I don't think most people understand what settlements are.
Yeah, maybe just like a quick overview of like the, current on the ground situation in Israel, Palestine, and then we can talk about, like how did it come there. So we had a really good episode that we did a while back with Danny Sherson, and he does a great job at like kind of showing you the situation on the ground. So if you want a more in-depth, look at what's happening now, I definitely recommend listening to that episode. But your TLDL, too long didn't listen, for this situation is that Israel, the country, and Palestine, the not country, at least not yet.
The occupied territory.
The occupied territory, thank you. So they've been in conflict for quite some time. It stemmed, pretty early on in Israel's founding. There were some wars that were referred to as intifadas.
They weren't. So here, let me interrupt you because the intifadas didn't come later. So what happened was that during the creation of Israel,
what had happened was
during the creation of Israel, about between 500,000 to 1 million Palestinians became refugees. They were expelled from their homes. So there was a war that took place between 47 and 49. And, it's the Israeli War of Independence on the Israeli side. It's the Nakba on the Palestinian side.
Thank you for correcting me. You're correct.
The Nakba. And basically what happened is that there was a war, and about 80% of the native population to the Arab population, Israel, was expelled out of their homes, and they had to leave. So they ended up going into different area. They ended up going into the West Bank and Gaza and just different parts of Israel.
As well as other countries as well.
There was just a big refugee crisis in the Middle East, and they went to areas where Jordan had occupied, as well as Egypt occupied, Jordan occupying the West Bank, and Egypt occupying Gaza. And what ended up happening is that the Israelis got into another war. The Israelis got into another war with their Arab neighbors. The 6-Day War, and it was an unconditional victory for Israel, and they took over those areas that had all these Palestinian refugees, the West Bank and Gaza and the Sinai and Egypt. So they have been occupying those areas ever since. Not the Sinai, but they've been occupying the West Bank, and then
they gave back the Sinai.
They gave back the Sinai. They've been occupying the West Bank, and with Gaza, they've just surrounded it basically with a wall. So they're just kind of like an escape from New York situation,
like
where they can't get out or leave, and there's a blockade, and they routinely bomb it. Right. But you see, there's a big problem because the roots, people like to pretend like this is the most complicated. Do you agree with this statement that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the most complicated conflict in the world?
I mean, I don't think it's the most complicated in the world. I think it's pretty simple to understand, but I think what's complicated about the situation is like, what side do you fall on?
Well, here's the thing: is that it's very this conflict is very wrapped up within partisan politics in the U.S.
Right.
That there's a clear, I don't want to say a clear divide between Republicans and Democrats,
Right.
because
there's people on both
overwhelmingly
sides that cross.
most people are pretty. I don't want to say. There's different polls that you can look at that show the difference between how Republicans and Democrats feel, or who they sympathize with more, the Israelis or the Palestinians. But there's definitely more of a divide of where the right, the U.S. right, is more sympathetic with the Israelis, and the U.S. left, they're probably more sympathetic with the Palestinians, at least at this point.
Right. And there are several people that break that mold for sure, like your standard deviants, but that's a pretty good understanding.
But the majority of people in most camps, when you ask them what their opinion is, they're like, well, it's a very complicated situation. The religion, these ancient religions have been battling for years, which is just, first of all, these religions have not been battling for years. It's not a religious sectarian battle. It's basically a question of colonization and land grabbing and annexing land. And what happened is that Israelis continued to settle in Israel after its creation. There was massive immigration spikes throughout the 20th century. In the 1930s, there was limits that were put in place on it at times by the British, but after the creation of Israel, there was more immigration there, and there continued to be a lot of immigration from Jews from different part of the world going to Israel, a lot from the Eastern Bloc, the Soviet Union, and there was a big demand for housing. And there was a big demand for land, and a lot of Jews in Israel started settling land in the West Bank. And it has been the status quo for the UN Security Council to adopt resolutions condemning Israeli settlements. It just is not just one time they've condemned them and called them illegal. They frequently call them illegal. They called them illegal pretty much every single time that they voted on it, and it's always been up until recent time. It's always been unanimous that the Israelis were committing this was illegal. And it was against Resolution 242, and then there was Resolution 252, and then 267, and then 298, and then 338. All of these resolutions, it was declared illegal for the Israelis to continue building settlements in the West Bank. And it was the status quo for most U.S. presidents for a pretty long time to adopt the same mentality. I mean, let's just be completely real. The United States has been very, very pro-Israel since the 1960s. Incredibly pro-Israel since the Johnson administration. Like, that was like the first administration that really became very close with Israel. But even, hardline, even Zionist-aligned presidents would be against the settlements. And the reason why is because the settlements, what they cause is a huge problem with, the ultimate goal in the Middle East peace process, which is, I guess, a two-state solution. The two-state solution, which is, at this point, I don't know how you can see as it a possibility, because what the West Bank looks like right now is Swiss cheese. That's the common analogy that you're going to hear from a lot of people who talk about the subject, that the West Bank is Swiss cheese, meaning that there is a wall between Israel and the West Bank. The wall actually annexes more land within the West Bank, over the 67 borders,
than it does across the border.
So it goes across the actual agreed borders, and then within the settlements, within the West Bank, there are Israeli settlements sprinkled across the entire everywhere. Just look at a map and you'll see a big list of a big look at Israeli settlements. And the issue is that, first of all, they're violating international law. They're further making a two-state solution, which, I mean, I don't necessarily agree that it's the ultimate goal, but it is been the, I guess, agreed upon status quo of
it's one of the options. Let's put it that way.
One of the options that has been probably most popular and most talked about between people who are both more sympathetic to the Israeli side and people who are more sympathetic to the Palestinian side. It's probably been the most agreed upon thing. But the settlements, what they do is they make that almost impossible to do, because now you're talking about, you have to remove the people. The only way to make that work is if you remove the settlers from the West Bank. And the settlers have called, they have, you can either call them Jewish neighborhoods or you can call them racial colonies. I think that both are probably appropriate. And these racial colonies have things like Jewish only roads. They're basically
no Arabs allowed.
Apartheid, it's colonial. It's like they're like colonial settlements within the West Bank. So it makes the peace process almost completely impossible to achieve.
Right. And without making any sweeping claims about the legitimacy of that. This is just the facts on the ground, right? It is a fact that West Bank is carved up into very small pieces. It is a fact that there are hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of Israeli settlers in the West Bank. It is a fact that the rate at which new settlements are being built is increasing, right? So we're not necessarily taking a side by stating those things, right? That's just the reality on the ground.
And it's been kind of something that it's not surprising that Donald Trump, the Trump administration, or Mike Pompeo at the very least, has announced, Israel's right to have the settlements. What's his exact quote? I don't even have the article in front of me. What's his exact quote?
Okay. Yeah. He said a couple of things. So he says, calling the establishment of civilian settlements inconsistent with international law hasn't worked. He's referencing there by, I'll get to that. Actually, no, let's start with that because I think it's really important because for many years in U.S. policy, we've been pretty vague on the issue of the settlement's legal status, but for the most part, all over the world, everyone's pretty clear about it. And I think the clearest statement came from Carter in the 70s, which is when he said that the settlements are inconsistent with international law. And excuse me, I misspoke there. The State Department of President Carter. So, the heads of state there had said that was their official position. And we've been running with that position for some time, right? Till now, basically. And then going back to Pompeo again, he says, calling the establishment of civilian settlements inconsistent with international law hasn't worked. It hasn't advanced the cause of peace. And then he stops there. I'm not going to get into my opinion just yet. Let's talk a little bit more about that, yeah.
But it's just funny because the attitude from even the executive office over the years, even our executive office has been, very pro-Israel. And it's not like any of this matters because all of this was only lip service, has been to call them illegal in many cases. So Jimmy Carter, he called the settlements illegal.
Inconsistent with international law. So it's a fancy
inconsistent.
Way of saying
he called it an illegal action.
Right.
Ronald Reagan actually contradicted him. At first, he said that he did not see them as illegal, but then he started saying that they were illegal. Reagan started saying that after during the war in Lebanon. He said that he said that they need to put in a new peace plan, and that the Israelis need to freeze all settlement activity. it was actually surprisingly the only U.S. president to really stand up to the Israeli pressure groups was George Bush. George Bush Sr. was the only president to really stand up to them, which is funny because his son was the exact opposite.
Right.
But
Apple fell way far from the tree on that particular position.
George W. Bush, he made them get out of Gaza. He made them.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's true.
But George H.W. Bush. So what was interesting is that, so it was Secretary of State James Baker. He called out Israel for saying that they have to lay aside their vision of a greater Israel. He quoted that. So you would never hear another politician say that. He said that they have to stop the settlement activity and they have to start actually treating them like human beings if there's going to be any type of peace process.
Right.
And there was like a peace process that was kind of going on at the time. And there were Israeli pressure groups on George H.W. Bush. Mm-hmm. During the Madrid peace talks, the Israeli there is a peace talks called the Madrid peace talks, and during the peace talks, the Bush administration, the H.W. Bush administration, they were asked by the Israelis for a $10 billion loan guarantee to help settle a wave of immigrants from the former Soviet Union, mm-hmm. and Bush was like, no, he's like, no, we're not going to do that. And the prime minister at the time, Yitzhak Shamir, his supporters started pushing Congress to go to White House and approve it. And they started pushing like Israeli pressure groups as well to do it, like Christian Zionist groups. But George H.W. Bush, he publicly denounced it, and he pledged that if it went to congressional action, that he would block it. So that's unheard of now. Could you imagine Trump doing anything like that? Even though Trump said that he wanted to be a fair negotiator while he was running for president.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have another impeachment inquiry.
But after that, I guess. What's tragic about the entire thing is that in the 90s, you could say that there was some peace. You can argue this, obviously, but
I think Bill Clinton did a fairly good job trying, right?
I wouldn't say it was Bill Clinton, like internally within Israel, because the Labor Party.
Well, I mean, he brought the two parties together in Camp David, and seemed like things were going to go pretty well from there. Didn't pan out that way, but it was a good effort.
In the 90s, there were obviously like the Oslo Accords, but mm-hmm. Before that, the Labor Party won the Israeli parliament. Yitzhak Rabin, he became prime minister, and he was really showing willingness to address Palestinian concerns, and he ended up getting assassinated. Like he met with Arafat at the Oslo Accords. They signed up. They started working things out, and they started, going over the permanent status negotiations and things like that. And he ended up being assassinated by a religious hardliner there. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like they have no chance to work this out. And now that the current administration within Israel right now, they really just cater to a very far right religious extremist faction within the base, the ones that think that land is part of their biblical right to settle. And when religion becomes involved like that, it's almost impossible to settle it. If you believe that God gave you land, and then it just really doesn't really make sense, because not everyone's the same religion as you. So,
well, I actually got a pretty interesting quote that I think colors that really well from Netanyahu just very recently. He says that this new U.S. policy he's referring to. He says this policy reflects a historical truth that the Jewish people are not foreign colonialists in Judea and Samaria. And obviously he's using Judea and Samaria like the biblical terms for the West Bank. And he goes on to say, in fact, we are called Jews because we are the people of Judea, right? So, you know, their whole stake to this claim is 100%, you know, like biblically rooted.
But before we get started on that, guys, let's just take a quick moment to talk about sex, good sex. Now you can increase your performance and get that extra confidence in bed. Listen up, BlueChew.com, that's blue like the color blue. Blue Chew brings you the first chewable with the same FDA-approved active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, so you know they work. You can take them anytime, day or night, even on a full stomach, and since they're chewable, they work up to twice as fast as a pill, so you can be ready whenever that opportunity arises, which I'm sure happens very frequently in your very exciting sex life. Every single time, you're a stud. We all know you're a stud. Every single time you go out, even if it's like a furniture store or a bookstore, it's a great place to pick up chicks, guys. You know, you're irresistible. But the problem is that you can't get it up. So you're that guy that all girls talk about behind their back with their friends. He's like, he's so hot, but he like can't. He's just not good in bed. Well, if you could benefit from extra function and more confidence where it counts, Blue Chew is the fast and easy way to enhance your performance. Most guys talk a good game, but Blue Chew helps you follow through. Blue Chew is prescribed online and it's shipped straight to your door in a discreet package. So no in-person doctor visits, no waiting in the pharmacy, and best of all, no more awkwardness. And believe me, telling your doctor you need Viagra is very, 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 very unsettling for both you and him, probably. They're made in the USA, and since Blue Chew prepares and ships direct, they're cheaper than a pharmacy. Right now, we got a special deal for our listeners. Visit BlueChew.com and get your first shipment free when you use our special promo code BRO. It's B-R-O. Just pay $5 shipping. Again, that's B-L-U-E Chew.com. Promo code BRO to try it free. Blue Chew is the better, cheaper, faster choice, and we thank them for sponsoring this podcast. All right.
Thanks, Blue Chew.
Explanation point. So thank you, Blue Chew. So, all right. Here's the problem with settlements. Now, you're basing this land off your own biblical text, and not everyone obviously is the same religion of you first. Everyone is not the same religion as you, and it just is wackadoodie nonsense. It's like believing in Santa Claus when you base your fucking your right to land based off your biblical text.
Well, let's not make like I don't want to offend anybody with that, but like,
I don't want to offend religious people like that. But we live in a world where we have secular values, and typically when you can say at the root of a good society, we do adopt, Judeo-Christian values, which are great, which, I think are good. I'm not beating down on religion, right. But when you use God to justify land grabbing, then that's when it becomes a problem, because not everyone's going to be worship the same God as you, or have the same faith as you, or have the same biblical origin story as you.
I mean, it's also just problematic because, I read the Bible when I was in Catholic school back when I was a young lad, and I remember hearing the story of Jews leaving a different place and going to Israel, or what was Israel at the time. So somebody was there before them too, so this concept of absolute ownership of a land, is kind of crazy. Maybe I'm going down the libertarian wing a little bit here, but you can go back 100 years, 4,000 years, 10,000 years, there's always somebody there before you, unless we straight up get to the point where we weren't humans, even then, what was the animals? It was the fucking dinosaurs. It was the promised land is for the dinosaurs, man.
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, what I was taught, I went to Catholic school, and I was taught that the Jews were expelled out of Israel by the Roman empires after a series of really bad revolts.
Right.
And they were dispersed across all of Europe. And that was the story that I was taught.
Right. But
and
even before
there's
that,
actually historical debate on that entire subject. The truth is, it's very complicated to go through all that story, to go through that, and that's just kind of like a religious text, what you find in the Bible. Sheldon
Torah
Richmond,
in this case, right?
You can't base land on your religion. It's just it's. I don't want to overuse this phrase, but God is not the real estate agent, but the devil is a real estate agent. It's unethical to claim land based off your religious heritage or your ethnic heritage. And I understand that a lot of secular Jews believe in Israel as well. But for the reasons of needing a secure place because the Jews were so severely persecuted within, over many years in Europe, which is true. The Jews were a very historically abused group within Europe. However, with the creation of Israel, you did it at the expense of another group, and that's the major tragedy of the entire situation.
Right.
And even with that, it's not the current people's fault who are born there now.
Right.
Whether you think it was right or wrong, it's not the current Israelis' fault. However, the settlements are a continuation of the policy that led to, hundreds of thousands of misplaced Palestinians and Arabs across the West Bank now living in absolute poverty and very disenfranchised, and an additional and even more who are now in probably one of the worst living conditions in the world in the West and in the Gaza Strip. So it's hard to justify that, right? Because they had a synagogue there for 2,000 years. They found the remnants of a synagogue there for 2,000 years ago. It's just not fair. And if you just say that you found, let's just say if a Native American tribe found an ancient, tribal ground underneath your house, does that give them the right to kick you out of your house and create an all Native American tribe, XYZ village in its place? No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. And in the same by the same vein, it isn't right for you to go into a Native American reservation and say, like, I'm just gonna set up shop here, like right now.
You're right, and it's just a tragic situation because it's just used by hardliners to really just justify land grabbing and land expansion. Now, is there anything that they can do? Is there any kind of peaceful resolution that could take place over the next couple years or decades? I don't think so, man. I think this is just so out of control that I don't think we can really expect any kind of
I'm not that pessimistic. I think it's a tough situation. I think that I still hold on to hope. Not just because I'm half Palestinian, so totally full disclaimer here. But because I think that people, generally speaking, are good. That's my opinion, right? And I think that a lot of people all over the world agree that this is not a good thing. And it's been this way for a very long time. There's 196 countries that are party to the Geneva Conventions, right? And I kind of want to talk about that. The Geneva Conventions, specifically the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is known as the Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war. Yet this was first adopted in 1949, right? And 196 countries are on board with this, including Israel and the non-state of Palestine and the U.S. and pretty much every other country. And we've been adopting these, kind of updates to these, all four of them throughout the years. And one thing in particular on the Fourth Geneva Convention clearly points out that what's going on here, this occupation, is illegal. So Section 3 on the occupied territories and the articles, I think it's 47 to 49. So specifically 49 reads, individual or mass forcible transfers, as well as deportation of protected persons from occupied territory to the territory of the occupying powers or to that of any other country, occupied or not, are prohibitive regardless of their motive. right? So, like, regardless of the fact that, you know, your religious text has a claim to the area, 196 countries all over the world agree that you're not supposed to occupy another land, even under war, and you're not supposed to kick people out of it, and you're certainly not supposed to create new settlements on it.
Yeah, and the problem, though, is that the government in Israel right now encourages it and promises. The other day, Netanyahu promised to take the Jordan Valley.
Right. I mean, and they also prohibit, like, this stuff also prohibits destruction. So something that we didn't touch on is that, you know, it's not just like, you know, the settlers, you know, they, you know, the Israeli military comes knocking on the doors to say, hey, please, can you leave? You know, we're going to have some new settlers here. You know, they destroy shit, right? They, like, raise villages and shit for the creation of these of these new settlements, you know? And if they deem it necessary for their security, they just raise it. And Article 53 in the same Geneva Convention prohibits the destruction by an occupying power of real or personal property belonging individually or collectively to private persons or to the state or to other public authorities or to social or cooperative organizations. You know, so it basically means you're not supposed to destroy shit when you're occupying something. It does, however, state, and I'll continue, that there is an exception where such destruction is rendered absolutely necessary by military operations. But to say that raising, you know, Palestinian homes in the West Bank is absolutely necessary for the military so that they can build a new settlement is just like, that's pushing the envelope, man.
Yeah, and you have to be fair. I mean, I'm trying to put this I'm trying to, like, lay out the reasons for settlements in, like, an objective way right now. But I guess some Israelis would say that there were Jews that were living in the West Bank before the 1948 war, and they wanted to return home.
And they should be allowed to, for sure.
And I'm sure some would say that it's completely for security reasons because, I mean, after the 6-Day War, they probably believed that war would break out again, and they would be right because the war broke out again back only a couple of years later in 1973, which was even more deadly with even more casualties.
Right, and you might be able to make that argument if only the people who were displaced out of those areas decided to come back. But it's not just them; they're literally importing people from all over the world, right, to settle in those places.
And to settle in those places, but, you know, for security reasons, they had to have those high hilltops within the West Bank to prevent, you know, Jordan and Syria coming back and hitting them on their eastern flank.
It's a bit of a chicken and the egg there, you know. It's like
I know it's the question. The question really is like, are the colonies for security? Or, you know, what starts the violence? Is it, you know, the colonization? Does that start the violence? Or is there violence because of the colonization, or do they create the colonies because of violence?
Right.
Because there is violence, because of security.
Right.
You know, what is the starting point? I would argue that the occupation probably causes more violence and more threats to Israel as a whole.
I mean, I'd argue that both are probably true, but if we're talking about today, I think you're correct. You know, it might have been in the past that creating a settlement on the top of a hill, you know, so that you primarily for, I mean, a lot of those settlements were initially started because you can't have like a military base there. That would be definitely against the, you know, the law there, right? International law. So they put civilians there, and then they protect those civilians with military, right? And so you could probably make that case for that early on in those settlements. But now we're decades and decades into the future, and new settlements are popping up literally today for no reason other than to settle people, to create new communities, in that region.
Well, another argument, though, you can make on behalf of the Israelis who are pro settlers is that the Israelis, they conquered the Sinai in 1956.
Right.
but Eisenhower made them give it back in 56.
Well,
there is a war that's not talked about at all.
Yeah, I mean, they also gave it back just because they wanted to broker a ceasefire too, right? There was like a reason other than just Eisenhower. Like, they legitimately wanted a ceasefire.
Eisenhower was the main catalyst there. That's when Eisenhower threw out the British and the French, because it was the British and the French and the Israelis. It was before the Israelis and the U.S. had like this super tight, like close knit relationship. But right. it was Eisenhower. It was the main reason. They thought that building settlements, if they were going to have the West Bank or have this new occupied territory, having the settlements would make it more difficult for Israel to withdraw and give that land back, which is right. Like, that would be like, which is absolutely right.
Yeah. But I mean, like, both are true, right? So on the one hand, you know, we have a President Eisenhower that basically bullied them into it, you know, or maybe bullying is the wrong word, but like pressured them into doing it, right? He was the catalyst, like, you have to give that back. But on the other hand, they also wanted a ceasefire, and there was like security reasons why they wanted to do it. In this case, where we are today, we don't have a president that's willing to put pressure on Israel to withdraw settlements or even just cease settlements, right? And we also don't have like an imminent major threat, because while there are rocket attacks and suicide bombs and things like that come out of Palestinian territories, which are objectively terrible, it's not quite the scale or the scope of going to war with a major nation with a major military. You know what I mean? So like, there's nobody, you know, pressuring them not to do it, and by nobody I mean the United States, and there's no major military threat there, so why would they stop?
Well, they're not going to stop doing it, because even when there's a UN Security Council condemning it, and even when a U.S. president tells them to stop, like saying, hey, knock it off, it's only really lip service. You know, no one really cares about doing it. It's not like settlements ever stopped making settlements, and there were ever any real consequences for making the settlements.
You might know the answer to this a little better, but I actually have an open question for you. You know, would you say that the actions of President Trump, or, you know, let's be fair, the last, I don't know, 5 U.S. presidents, do you think that their stance there was similarly genuine as, say, Eisenhower's stance to try and get rid of the settlements in Sinai?
Well, Eisenhower did it for different reasons. Like, Eisenhower wasn't doing it for like moral or altruistic reasons. He saw it as an expansion of the French and British imperialism, and the Eisenhower doctrine was to break up the French and the British empires. So it wasn't really about, I don't really think it was from keeping Israel from conquering parts of Egypt. I think he wanted to just get rid of the British and the French, because it was a conspiracy between the British and French, and the British, French, and the Israelis. And Eisenhower had UN troops there saying that if you don't get out, the UN NATO troops are going to start shooting you. Like, he threatened to start shooting them if they didn't leave.
Right.
So I don't think that Eisenhower was doing it for some like altruistic or for a reason to keep, you know, that part of the world stable. It was more about just keeping mainly the Brits out.
Well, I mean, you know, reasons aside, like the reason why he was there, I think that his threat was credible and earnest, well more so than the last several U.S. presidents, in terms of when, you know, we say, hey, this is wrong, don't do that.
There was still, at that time, they were still trying to bargain out they were still trying to win friends and influence people in the Middle East. Yeah, it's the title, How to Win Friends and Influence People. There was still kind of like some chess. The parties weren't aligned yet in the Cold War within the Middle East. So the British and the Americans were still talking to Egypt at the time about, you know, being in their sphere of influence, and, you know, they were trying to bribe Nasser into, you know, being basically pro-U.S. to like completely simplify everything. But Nasser wasn't completely going along with U.S. demands, and there was a lot of friction between Nasser and Eisenhower, which is like too long to get into right now. and they ended up falling more into the Soviet sphere of influence. After that, the rules of the game changed within the Middle East, but or at least the game plan changed. The U.S. started supporting, the Israelis as more of a bulwark against the Soviets' expansion within the Middle East at that time.
Russia.
It's all about Russia. Which brings me to the point I wanted to make. We spend all this time on Russiagate and Ukrainegate about like possible foreign interference, and the fact that no one looks into Trump, his son-in-law, and his son-in-law's connection with Benjamin Netanyahu is absurd to me. How do you not first of all, the nepotism right there in itself is just gross.
Right.
Like,
move over
we can
Joe
talk,
Biden.
we can talk about Hunter Biden all we want. And, I'm obviously, if you listen to our last episode, I'm no fan of Joe Biden and the nepotism of Hunter or the position. I don't agree with Hunter Biden's pedigree to sit on the Ukrainian energy board, to blow lines of coke and fuck hookers all day. However, it's a total political unionship between the Trumps and the Kushners. The way that they're real estate guys, you know what I mean? Like the families had real estate connections prior to their kids even getting married, and there is a deep connection between the Kushners and Benjamin Netanyahu. Like, they're good old family friends. You have to look at this as, and by the way, Jared Kushner has investments in Israeli settlements as well. So I don't know. That's probably a pretty big conflict of interest, right?
Yeah,
the guy who's in charge with the new Middle East peace plan, he actually has an invested interest in Israeli in Israeli settlements.
Quid pro quo, anyone?
What? Like, why isn't that the investigation? Like, you have it right there. But the thing is, though, is that Israeli pressure groups would never let that happen, and pretty much 90% or a very large portion of politicians are influenced tremendously by Israeli pressure groups. So, an investigation like that wouldn't really go that far. Unfortunately, that's if you want to get Trump, and if you really want to find like some true corruption, you got to look at his connection with Benjamin Netanyahu. Look through his connection with Benjamin Netanyahu, his son-in-law Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner Benjamin Netanyahu used to literally sleep in Jared Kushner's bed.
His bunk bed.
That's his bunk bed. They used to share one together. Like, why don't you investigate that? Like, that's bad. Isn't that weird? Isn't that weirder than the Ukraine gate, than his stupid phone call about, like, which is basically semantics and trying to dissect words and trying to prove something. I know we came to a lot of disagreements on that episode, but can you agree that this is definitely more blatant, and there's more evidence that there is a very uniquely suspicious connection between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu? Like, look at the timeline right now. Look at the timeline. Yes. Between when Donald Trump became president, he became the most pro-Israel president off the bat.
Right.
Prior to him becoming president, he was actually saying that he was going to be middle of the road with the issue. He said, I can't be too pro-Israel because won't be able to negotiate a peace. But when he became president, he became the most pro-Israel president ever. And it wasn't just pro-Israel. It was pro-specific party in Israel.
Right.
It was pro-Likud party Israel.
Right.
Which is like the moderate center-right side that forms coalitions with the hardliner Zionist groups that believe that they have the right to the land because God gave it to them.
Right, and he's given them the biggest wins that any other president could have ever given them. I mean, just moving the embassy to Jerusalem was like, whew, that was a big one. They loved that.
I mean, a lot of it's just symbolic, though. I mean, this is symbolic as well when you think about it. It doesn't really change things on the ground at all.
Well, does it though?
It changes. it just causes more resentment from Arabs to Israelis there. So I would argue that it actually makes Israelis less safe because
I'd agree with that, but I think it also it does change the situation on the ground because now they, the Likud party and Benjamin Netanyahu have basically the green light to go and do more settlements, which will objectively create more tension. And
they would make those settlements regardless. And the thing is that a lot of the timeline between these favors that Trump, like whenever Trump recognizes something for as Israel, it's always like when Netanyahu's kind of in a bind. So when he recognized the Golan Heights, it was during the election when he was down in the polls, and then it went up in the polls.
Right,
right now, it's Benny Gantz is trying to form a government, and he's doing it.
Like the 4th, 5th, 10th vote or whatever that they're going on.
This election is going to go on for a long time, and I just want to be clear, like. It's really wrong to collectively condemn anyone,
right.
And when we do these podcasts, we're not collectively condemning Jewish people. We're not collectively condemning Israeli people at all. We're criticizing governments, and we're criticizing people who are religious fanatics.
Right. We're criticizing specific people in governments
specific
as
people.
Well.
And we criticize people who are religious fanatics in all walks of life, including American religious fanatics, Wahhabi religious fanatics. Everyone should be open to criticism.
Well, that's a really good segue on religious fanaticism, because another big thing that came out of this whole issue, like obviously, the biggest one is U.S. softening position on the settlements, but before that even happened, Israel killed an Islamic Jihad commander in Gaza, and that set off a bit of a skirmish there.
Yeah, Islamic Jihad fired rockets into Israel, and then Israel started bombing Gaza.
Right.
Par for the course.
Right.
Lots
of people died.
And the death count is all people from Gaza.
Yeah.
I haven't checked the death count. What was it, 100 people? I don't want to be wrong about this, so, great, take it with a grain of salt, but I think I saw the death count of 100 people or so. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of dead people. The civilians, we're talking mostly. And they have nowhere to go. Like, these people who are trapped in the city, they don't have anywhere to go. And a lot of people on the right, there's a pure lack of empathy for these people. Like, imagine if you were trapped in a city and it was just routinely bombed all the time. And even if you just take away the entire who started it argument, like, all right, if you just threw all that out the window, whether it was the Arabs or the Israelis or whoever started the entire conflict in the first place, because we'll argue with that. We can argue that for the rest of time and not get anywhere. But these people, they live in an area where the Israelis say they don't occupy it anymore. They just have a blockade and have a wall around it and shoot people who approach the border. It is living hell there. It's living hell there. It's overpopulated. It's
some of the fastest growth rates in the world, like birth rates in the world. Yeah.
It's overpopulated. It's poor. The government there is terrible.
Absolutely
like, listen,
terrible.
Like their government is Hamas, and the big problem with Hamas is that it's a violent group, first of all, and also a lot of them are they're like former Palestinian prisoners who have been living in jail for 20 years, so they're not even living in reality, and they're the heads of state. However, everyone in Gaza is routinely collectively condemned as Hamas sympathizers whenever they're killed. And they're not even seen as like casualties of war or collateral. They're just seen as, like whatever, Hamas, fuck them. It's if you're born in Gaza, you're dead. You're dead already. You have no future. You have no life. Like, imagine if you and your kids were born in Gaza, like, you wouldn't be able to give your kid a life. You wouldn't be able to. They wouldn't be able to really do anything besides live in this prison and wait for the day until they got bombed and killed and murdered, and like that's life. It's they are the most oppressed people on this planet, and at the very least, you should have some empathy for them and understand that it's not all just the Arab mindset, like how Dennis Prager likes to say. It's the Arab mindset of revenge that keeps peace. I'm Dennis Prager, and I will. It's the Arab mindset. Prager, Israel's this tiny, tiny little country. Oh, whatever. Why would anyone want to attack Israel? It's this tiny, tiny little country. It's because of the occupation that people in Gaza resent you. It's like the resentment is caused because of the occupation and the militarism. And if you can't understand that point of you can't understand that you have a group that thinks that in their mindset that they've been humiliated since the early 20th century. You know, we're talking about in the West Bank, people are thrown, and there was a guy, I don't know if you saw this video, but a guy he handed over his backpack to some IDF guys, and he was walking away with his hands up, and they shot him in the back with a rubber bullet. And rubber bullets, they're rubber bullets. They're still steel in the center of the bullet. It's still breaking skin, and it still hurts, and it's still humiliating. It's just like, it's a molestation of people's rights to be occupied like that. And that's why I have a lot of sympathy for people who are treated like that by cops in the U.S. You know, Bill de Blasio is running for president, or talking about running for president. I don't even know the official run for president or whatever the hell the debate. Bill de Blasio's stop and frisk in New York.
Have you ever been frisked?
He apologized. No, I've never been. Yeah, I've been frisked at bars, and I've been frisked at by security and by the TSA. I know I've never been stopped and frisked.
Yeah, neither have I. But I get terrified every time I see them coming off the subway. Like they got their little table set up, and they're gonna.
They have to fill their quota of white guys, so they go to me we got to make it seem like we're not completely just targeting black guys.
Yeah.
So we got to do one white guy. It's. I mean. That was wrong. He apologized for it, but that was totally wrong.
Right.
It was totally wrong. You can't just be like, you're suspicious. Get over here, boy. Drop your pants down. There was this funny Onion, to go off topic, there was this funny Onion parody of the stop and frisk called Stop and Kiss. And this was before The Onion was a super big phenomenon, so not everyone knew that it was completely satire, and a lot of people believed that this stop and kiss policy was real. So people are like, "Oh, the NYPD has reached a new low. This stop and kiss policy has to end." And it was a video. It's very funny. I recommend it. But yeah, just have some empathy towards people who are living in really, really terrible conditions, and don't equate their resentment to their evil religion of Islam, because most Muslim people aren't violent and don't believe in the extreme factors that you try to project on them, like cutting off hands for stealing and burning people for witchcraft and doing all these horrible things that you project on them. Most Muslim people are completely nonviolent, and they don't interpret the Quran like that. And you have a big population, or you have a big group of liberal secular Jewish Zionists who will relate everything as a problem with Islam, and that's why there's conflict in the Middle East. It's because of radical Islam, and it's because it's due to the Quran and specific texts in the Hadith that make this conflict unavoidable and completely on the hands of the Arabs. But you can go to anyone's biblical text and you can take out some violent parts of it. And it's just, there's no religion that is immune to some violent chapters or anything like that.
None.
And they blame everything on Islam. And even in Saudi Arabia, the most hard-line Wahhabi, Salafist, Orthodox, conservative group of Muslims, even the vast majority of Salafists are nonviolent and don't want to hurt anyone and don't interpret the Quran as I will be violent to you for whatever XYZ reason that I can think of because Muhammad said so. Like, most of these conflicts are not due to the Islam. It's due to things like blowback, like being bombed and being occupied. It's not religion that's making them do it. It's how they're being treated. And just imagine the United States. Let's just say that there was an area in the United States that was occupied by another country. Let's just say that someone started occupying Texas, and they started occupying Texas because of oil interest. Imagine that in a sick world. Yeah. Why do you think that the people in Texas would? Do you think that people in Texas would revolt? I think they would. I think the people from Texas would step up if there was a foreign occupier and they were drawing up like weird borders across the United States that made no sense based on culture and values and religion and things like that. And, you know, they propped up these like puppet corrupt leaders as presidents and leaders of the state. You know who would revolt? Those Texans with guns. And you know what they would be saying when they would revolt and when they would, you know, shoot up whatever? They would be doing it in the name of God. They'd be like, I'm doing this in the name of Jesus.
Well, you know,
they would be doing it in the name of God.
I saw this one funny Reddit post a long time ago, and I pulled it up as you were talking, and it says it's a picture of like Jesus during one of his little stints, and it says, if anyone ever asks you what would Jesus do, remind them that flipping over tables and chasing people with a whip is within the realm of possibilities. So on your point about picking out like the violent parts of any religion, there's one.
I have an idea. I know how to settle the entire Israeli Palestinian conflict.
Oh God, here we go. Let's see.
Everyone convert to Christianity.
Why did I know that was coming?
That's all you need to do. Everyone just needs to convert to Christianity. Jesus will bring the light. Amen.
And on that, literally, as you're saying that, my smart light bulb timer just turned my light down. Believe it or not. So.
I know that we're probably going to get some flack for whenever we talk about Israel Palestine, we get some flack back. But like, guys, don't take it so personal. Even if you do disagree with us, like, grow up and hear the other side of the argument for once without being like, oh you're anti-Israel bias. Oh. I mean, I want what's best for the Israeli as well, and I just think the actions and the behavior of the Israeli government and the settlers is not in the interest of the Jewish population that lives in Israel. And I think a lot of the behavior is going to end up hurting them in the long run. And my fear is that if there is a situation where there is a complete demographic change in that area and it no longer can be a Jewish state at all, then Israelis will be collectively condemned. Because usually cycles of violence, you know, they repeat.
Right.
And that's the last thing I want. Like, I don't want any Israeli getting hurt, or I don't want any violence on either side. You know, you have to be realistic and look at, you know, why is there a conflict there? Is it because of Muslims and the Arab mindset, or is it because of an occupation that's going on? Just be realistic and think about that before, you start sloganeering and start saying Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. Yeah, Hamas is a fucking evil group. It's a terrible group, but that's not a justification for the treatment of Palestinians in both the West Bank as well as Gaza. And Hamas is not even in the West Bank, so you can't even throw that argument out there.
That's right.
And it's... Just grow up.
Well, maybe we can segue to some other Israel news. So just today, Israel carried out some, quote, wide-scale strikes on targets in Syria. Evidently, they were belonging to some Iranian Qud, Q-U-D.
Qud forces. They're like the Green Berets of Iran.
Right.
They go and they train militias and stuff like that. They were involved in training Hezbollah and stuff like that.
Correct. So, evidently the
Quds Force.
Quds
That's why that's honestly, not to interrupt you, but it's an interesting topic alone because I've spoken to a lot of like real experts, and they're one of the big lines they say of why Iran is able to contend with Saudi Arabia as a regional power in the Persian Gulf is because the Quds Force is so effective in creating allies and creating basically assets within other areas in the Middle East, and Saudi Arabia can only really do that by creating Wahhabi fanatics.
Right. Right.
But go on.
No, so these Quds forces, there were 4 rockets that were launched into Israel, and that was maybe, this part isn't clear, but maybe in response to, the U.S. light softening their position on settlements. Maybe not. We don't know. But objectively, there were 4 rockets that were fired into Israel from Syria, very likely from Iranian Quds forces. Now, not to, kind of miss an opportunity here, Israeli forces struck them with absolute prejudice. And I mean that in like the military way, like they totally spanked the shit out of them. Basically what happened was, Israel told Syria, like, don't shoot anti-air missiles at us. Like, don't do that. We're hitting, these terrorist groups, we're hitting Iranian Quds forces, not Syria. And of course, Syria is trying to defend their, national airspace. So they fire an air defense missile, despite clear warnings to not do that from the Israeli military. And as a result, Israel just wiped a bunch of Syrian air defenses off the ground. Like a bunch of air defense batteries were just destroyed.
What kind of defense batteries were destroyed?
I was looking for this. I really wanted to see if they were using S-300s or S-400s.
I doubt they were S-300s.
I know that's the question that you're like what you're getting at.
I didn't think I wouldn't even expect them to be S-300s. They would already be talking. If they were S-300s, then there would be articles all over every foreign policy publication talking about how Israel struck S-300s.
Right.
I bet you they weren't even S-200s.
Right. So like, the point though is that they not only, wiped out a bunch of places that were like Iranian-backed Quds forces.
Yeah, they weren't even Syrian forces.
Right.
Weren't they? Yeah, they most likely weren't anything.
Yeah, they were definitely attacking Quds forces. I don't think that part was a question. But what was crazy about it is that in response to Syria, like, tracking and firing an anti-air missile at one of their jets, they're like, well, all right, fuck you guys too. And they completely wipe out a bunch of Syrian air defenses too, which is crazy. And what's nuts about this is that like Israel's been like doing a shadow war against Iran in Syria for like a long time, but they don't often admit to like their strikes. Like they don't take responsibility for them. It's like everybody knows it was Israel, but like they're usually pretty tight-lipped about it, pretty quiet. But this time around, they were like, yeah, we did it. As a matter of fact, the IDF tweeted about it, and they said, we hold the Syrian regime responsible for the actions that take place in Syrian territory and warn them against allowing further attacks against Israel. They continue in a different tweet, we will continue operating firmly and for as long as necessary against the Iranian entrenchment in Syria. Right? And that's kind of like a departure from their typical MO here, because they'll usually just get the job done and keep quiet about it, But this time around, they're definitely making big noise about it. And, it kind of begs the question that we were asking before. Is it because BB needs a win? Is it because they're having some trouble there?
Yeah, it is. It is pretty political. They usually, bombings always escalate and violence always escalates during election season because, again, it's Netanyahu's coalition includes the extreme right side of Israeli politics on it. So he's trying to appease them, and it's funny because Benny Gantz has one of the coalitions that's in Benny Gantz's the blue and whites is the Arab or is the Palestinian party, and obviously Benny Gantz is like, look at them, oh, they have Palestinians in their coalition, they cannot be in government, they have Arab, or they have Arab. You do know Arab did the Holocaust, right? Like he said that once, by the way.
He actually did. Yeah.
Netanyahu. I was on Mr. Sue's show the other day, and I phrased it like Benjamin Netanyahu is an obnoxious, corrupt racist.
We're specifically talking about Benjamin Netanyahu.
Benjamin Iran has 6 months away from building a nuclear weapon. As my cartoon bomb that I drew.
But Netanyahu, you said that 6 years ago.
Iran is 6 months away. You do know that they're the ones who convinced Hitler to burn the Jews, right?
Oh, Jesus.
I was like, what? Yeah. Do you see he showed up he gave Obama like text about how Persia. I forget exactly what he gave them, but it was in the context of giving him like old scripture and how like Persians were evil. It was I forget exactly.
Did you not see what they did to the 300 in Thermopylae?
Yeah. It was the Iran. They don't change.
I think this is a good stopping point, dude. Anything else to add on this point, or?
Yeah. So there's some interesting things with China and South Korea that are interesting that are going on. So China and South Korea just signed a defense pact.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It is interesting.
Super interesting.
I would suggest looking into it because we're going to run over time, and I'm about to pass the fuck out because I'm tired and it is late in the morning, and I will probably get the story completely wrong because I'm getting to that point where I'm slurring my words. But any last words?
Don't forget to fill out your census.
Your census?
Yeah, the U.S. Census.
Am I missing something?
Clearly, I've just informed you.
What's the census?
Every 10 years, we count how many people are in the United States. You should fill that out.
That sounds like a recipe for the U.S. just like tracking its citizens so they could like, I don't know, put some type of microchip.
Well, it's in the sixth line of the U.S. Constitution. And that came out before we even had the amendment about free speech. So there's that.
You see that? The globalists are trying to track you.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get into this, but...
the globalist Luciferians?
But the thing about this is that, there was maybe going to be the Trump administration wanted to do a big push on putting the citizenship question on the census. And, in case you are not a citizen of the United States and like bro history and you're listening to this far into our episode, go ahead and fill out that census. The question is not on there. Don't be bullied. Don't be afraid. They're not using this information to track to see if you are illegal or not so that ICE can come knock on your door. It's not even on there. Fill it out. It's super important. It's how we allocate our resources. It's how we figure out how many House representatives your state will get. It's really, really important. You should do your civic duty even if you're not a citizen of the United States. Like, it's important to know.
Half these people want to end the state, man. They're not going to fill out shit who listen to the show.
Well, the other half. Fill out your census.
Volunteers census. Fuck the government. All right. Let's bounce.
All right.
Peace.